Hi everyone. I chose to use Nearpod for my presentation for this week, just because I think that Nearpod is really awesome. And I'm using both the webcam and the screencast, so I can kind of show you what it looks like from a teacher's perspective on the screencast, and what a student would see, because I have it pulled up on my iPad for the student perspective, just in case you've never seen Nearpod, so you can see what it all looks like together. So basically, I kind of just went in order of the different prompts and have a little bit of an example of a unit in here and how I would teach it in the online environment. But first, I just want to talk about what my philosophy of online teaching is, and what my role as an online educator would be. So I think the most important thing for me are my 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and community. My idea of communication and community are different because I want the communication really focuses more on communication between me and my students. I try to be as open with my students as I can as far as like lines of communication. I want them to know that I'm here to help them if they don't understand something. I want them to know that they can come to me, they can ask, and that's really important in both a brick and mortar and an online setting. So communication is really, really big for me. Collaboration is huge in my content area. So in English, besides if they're like taking a test or writing a final draft of an essay, we collaborate every single day. There's so many different avenues that my content can take that it's really important to me that they collaborate, that they bounce their ideas off of each other, that they kind of talk through different scenarios to come up with multiple different answers instead of just assuming that there's one right answer and kind of coming up with it on their own. So collaboration is huge for me. And then that idea of community as well. I want my students to trust each other. I want them to be able to interact with each other. English is a subject where you kind of have to be vulnerable because there's a lot of sharing, there's a lot of collaboration going on, and if they don't trust each other and they don't feel safe with each other, they're not going to do what I want them to do, and it's not going to be as successful of a lesson as I want it to be. So those 3 are really, really big to me and what I would focus on both in my online setting and what I focus on in my brick and mortar. So as far as my role as an online educator, I think that the idea of being a guide and a facilitator and not a micromanager is really big, and something that was difficult for me to learn even as a brick and mortar teacher. I have got to loosen the reins a little bit and just kind of point them in the right direction, but let them do the learning and not do it for them. So Rice on page 42 of chapter, I think this is chapter 2 that this is in, talks about letting your, as an online instructor, you must be willing to release some control to encourage a learning community that empowers the learner. So you cannot control everything, and that's something that as a teacher, of course I want to control everything. It's my classroom. I want the learning outcome to come the way that I want it to. But I already know everything that I'm teaching. They don't. So really just kind of letting the micromanagement go and letting them get to an end result through their own process is really what my role would be as an online educator. And then the social presence model plays a really large role in how I would want my classroom designed and executed. So I want high interaction. I want lots of community and collaborative involvement. And I want to be present as an instructor, but I don't want to be overbearing. So that's definitely, those 3 elements at least of the social presence model are really, really important to me. So as far as the Nearpod, what happens is anytime I switch a screen on my presentations, like we're on this screen right now, anytime I switch a screen, it will switch on the student's screen as well, which is pretty cool because then I know that they're following along with me and I don't have to say, okay, click to the next screen, and then if they didn't hear me, then they're 3 screens behind. So the unit that I think would work really well in an online setting is my word morphology unit. I used it in past modules, but what I think is good about this unit is that it really lends itself to the online environment because there's a lot of research in this unit that needs to come from the internet, and they can do flashcards. It's a lot of rote memorization in this unit, so flashcards on Quizlet and kind of just reviewing and collaboration in this unit. So I like this one. I think that it works pretty well in an online environment. So as far as what you see on the teacher screen, this is actually, I embedded this in the Nearpod, so when they get to it, they would just have to sign into Google, and then once they sign in, it will take them to their own copy of this word morphology packet, which is what my students use in order to figure out root words, prefixes, and suffixes. So they fill this all out. They have to figure out, typically the way that I do it is I have them come up with example words that contain the root, the prefix, or the suffix in it, and then I have them figure out the definition based on the example word. But this is all collaborative. And I talk about that later on in this presentation, that this is a lot of collaboration in this unit because they come up with the example words together, or they can come up with the example words on their own and collaborate to discover the definition. So they would actually have access to this directly in their Nearpod. Once they finish that, this is pretty cool too. This is what it looks like on the student version. This, I can embed a website into Nearpod so that when they get to this, they can actually click on it and start interacting with the website. So like on my teacher version of it, it just shows the website that I embedded. But on the student version, I can actually interact and start participating. So like now I can go ahead and do my flashcards and go from there. So that's pretty cool. And this is something that they can do, and again, I talk about this later, this is something that they can do on their own as a study technique. This is also something that I do in my brick and mortar class and can be done in an online classroom. They can go into breakout rooms and they can quiz each other with these flashcards. So this is a really beneficial tool. And then finally, they can actually take the quiz that I've set up for them. It's only 2 questions right now, but I have a word morphology test at the end of this unit that if I wanted to, I could give them the test directly on Nearpod, and then they can just start it right from there, and then they just select their answers, and then next, and they submit, and then I can see here what score they got, and it'll go from there, and it's really, really neat. So really lends itself to the online environment, both individual tasks and collaborative tasks, and all can be done digitally. So the tools, as far as synchronous, asynchronous, and collaborative tools that I would use throughout both my online teaching and throughout this unit specifically, my synchronous tools, that Google Doc that we have, it's the packet where it has all of their prefixes and all of their roots and all of their suffixes. What's really cool about Google Docs and what my favorite part about them is that they can collaborate on a Google Doc and I can monitor what they're doing on that Google Doc, which is really, really beneficial for me. So they'd share that Google Doc to find example words for each root and affix, and then they'd fill in the rest of the blanks together. And that would be something that I could do in a synchronous lesson. The time can be determined for them. And I can say, okay, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you're going to go and fill in the rest of the blanks with your partner. My asynchronous tools, as far as this unit goes, would be something like that word morphology quiz. I would give them a due date and say, it's due by October 12th, and then any time that it goes live, they have up till October 12th to get that finished. So that's something that I could do asynchronously through Nearpod or through Google Forms, or there's a couple of different, I could do it through Quizlet. There's a couple of different resources that I can use to actually give them that online testing format. And then as far as collaboration goes, I really think the breakout rooms are cool. We saw those when we were looking at the sample lessons in the earlier modules. So I think the breakout rooms are really, really cool because they can use them to quiz each other on the flashcards. They can use the breakout rooms to figure out how they're going to fill in the blanks for that Google sheet. So I think that's really beneficial. As far as my assessment and management, I'm going a couple of different directions here. So initially my first thought was I really like to use the breakout rooms, but at the same time we didn't get to see a lot of what it looked like or sounded like for the teacher when we were looking at the sample lessons. So I'm not sure if they would be hard to manage. I don't know, can you see everything that's going on in a breakout room? Can you hear what they're discussing? Like what exactly are you as the teacher seeing and monitoring and managing while they're in those breakout rooms? So I think that like on paper they sound really good, but I'd have to do more research on them. Rice on page 142 in chapter 6 talks about kind of the benefits and challenges of instructional discussion forums, and one of the challenges she points out is that they must be managed and guided. And I just don't know a lot of what the management is like in a breakout room, so definitely something that I'd want to explore further. The shareable documents like Google Docs or Google Sheets or basically anything Google that's a shareable document, those are really easy to manage for me because they just have to share it with me and I can see everything that they're doing. I can see who's doing what, who's done the most amount of work, have they split it up evenly, are they on track? So those shareable documents are huge for me because it really helps me progress monitor them. This unit specifically is a lot of formative assessment. This word morphology unit is a lot of formative assessment and progress monitoring and checking for understanding. We do a lot of practice activities that can be done digitally that allow me to kind of gauge their understanding of the material without it being high risk, because in the beginning when they're doing those practice sessions and the practice with the content, they're still just getting the hang of it. So I'm not really looking for accuracy as much as I'm looking for growth. So a lot of formative assessment in this unit. And then the summative assessment comes specifically when I give them that unit test at the end. As far as the management assessment, just in general online teaching, I thought pages 150 to 155 of Rice's Chapter 6 were super, super helpful because it gives you a whole list, like 5 pages worth of how you can manage online discussions and solutions if there's issues, like if kids aren't participating or they're giving like generic replies. I know that that's been something that we've talked about in this class, like no generic replies. So I really thought that those pages were awesome because there's a lot of information there to kind of help you combat the issues that you may get in an online discussion forum with that assessment and with that management. My ahas, I think that my ahas are probably similar to a lot of other people. Online teaching is really hard. I don't think I had a concept of how difficult it was prior to this class. It's a lot of planning and a lot of thorough planning and involvement and application of theory because you have to know not just your content, not just how your students receive your content, but you've also got to know about the technology, which yes, you have to know that in brick and mortar schools in the 21st century. But it's a lot more in-depth in the online teaching environment. So it's hard. I think that part of it might just feel hard because it's new right now. So teaching your first year is hard because it's new. Student teaching is kind of hard because it's new. You're in an element that you're not really familiar with. Communication and community are pivotal in an online classroom. There's no way to get around that. If you don't have communication with your students and you don't have community within your student groups, your online classroom is not going to be successful, and I wholeheartedly believe that. Planning is just as important as execution. Sometimes I think that there have been lessons where I'm like, gosh, if I just execute this really well, the planning that I did for it is, if it was questionable, then it's okay, as long as I'm like teaching this really, really well. But I think in online education, because you don't get the same face-to-face interaction, you don't get that same presence in online teaching that you do in brick and mortar, I think that the planning is just as important. If your plans are weak, I think your lesson is going to be weak. And then finally, just this is the big one for me, just kind of like letting the reins go, backing off a little bit with trying to control everything. Let them learn. The questions, this is actually something that you can do in Nearpod, which I think is pretty cool. You can send open-ended questions. So like my questions that I still have are, when does it get easier? Is it a thing where like veteran brick and mortar teachers, you're 20 years in and you're like, it's still hard? Or is it something that it eventually gets easier? But this is cool because they can actually type a response in there and you can send it and it'll go right through. So that's one question that I have is, when does it get easier? How do you keep up with the advancements in educational technology, and are you expected to keep up with everything? What is the expectation from your program that you're teaching through, your organization that you're teaching through? What's the expectation in keeping up with all of the advancements? Because that's a lot. So that's definitely a question that I still have. And do online educators face quicker burnout than brick and mortar teachers? I know that burnout is a really big, scary topic in education. So I'm wondering, is it more likely for online educators, because of all of the planning and advancements, is it more likely that they burn out faster than brick and mortar teachers? So that's everything put all together. Thanks for watching.